overwhelm is real. I'm sure that anybody that's listening to this podcast can identify with that, as can you, and as can I. A couple things that this book helps with regard to that is number one, pointing to actual concrete wins. Like anybody that's spending time scrolling on their phone or online reading news, like it's sometimes very hard to find the wins and like proof positive that like showing up and giving a shit actually matters. So there is just an underlying reminder that giving up and giving in is simply not an option, right? We have to remain engaged in this.
I'm Meg Carney, an outdoor and environmental journalist, and this is the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. Thank you for joining us so that together we can create a better outdoor space as we recreate.
Hello everyone, Alex here, filling in for Meg this week while she's out. Before we dive in, I wanted to let you know that there won't be a new episode next week on July 7th. We're taking a short break for the long holiday weekend, but we'll be back for the following week. For today's episode, we're featuring a conversation Meg recorded with Nick Mucha, one of the editors on Patagonia's new book, Tools to Save Our Home Planet, a Changemaker's Guidebook. This collection brings together wisdom, stories, and strategies from over 50 environmental and justice-focused activists working on the front lines of climate action around the world. The book was created to serve as both a call to action and a practical guide, helping activists, organizers, and everyday people build skills in communications, fundraising, legal tools, mobilization, and collective action, especially during this turbulent political moment. It's an inspiring and honest conversation about balancing hope with realism, finding your place in this work, and how each of us can turn concern for the planet into meaningful action.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast today. I am really excited for this conversation. So to kick us off, I am just going to have us jump right in to talk about what inspired the creation of this book and this collection of voices in Tools to Save Our Home Planet.
Yeah, well, the inspiration for this book came from the book that preceded it. So we wrote a book called Tools for Grassroots Activist back in 2015, 2016, which was really a book that reflected all the lessons, like the core lessons from a conference that we host every 2 years for our grantee community called the Tools Conference. So the Tools Conference is something we've been doing for over 30 years. It brings together a collection of leaders and activists from within the organizations that we fund and give grants to. And it's like a 5-day intensive conference of workshops and keynote speakers, and really covers the gamut of topics for nonprofit leaders and activists. So that book was written in 2015 to kind of be a very succinct kind of highlight reel from the Tools Conference. Well, fast forward to about 2019, it was about time for us to revisit that book and maybe give it a little bit of a refresh, so to speak. And as a small group of us came together to start kind of teasing out what would we want to update or change in that book, it became very clear to us that, oh my gosh, it's only been a couple of years since this last book was published, but so much in this space and the movement has changed and in the world around us that we actually needed to completely overhaul the book. And so, to answer your question, that is what inspired it. We actually, from top to bottom, did a rewrite of the book itself.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, if we back up even further, though, in Patagonia's general journey with grassroots activism,
Yeah.
why did you feel like there was a need for a conference like that to bring together those activist voices and like grassroots organizers to then like eventually snowball into these books and other resources for people outside of
Yeah.
this group?
Such a good question. I mean, so we have, over 40 years supporting grassroots activism and grassroots organizations. In fact, like where I'm located right now, which is in Ventura, California, I'm like a couple hundred yards away from the Ventura River, which is a river that dumps out in the Pacific Ocean, and it literally runs like right behind the office here. Back in the early 70s, that river was being proposed by the Army Corps of Engineers to be channelized. It was considered what they call a dead river, meaning it was devoid of, significant life or biodiversity, and therefore is subject to the Army Corps of Engineers plans. Well, Patagonia was pretty young at that point in time. However, we made connection with a young activist. Actually, it was at a surf film premiere here in Ventura. There was a bunch of hippie surfers that went to go see, a surf film at night. And a young activist got up and made the case that, hey, the Ventura River is under threat, and drove people to go to the city council meeting and get engaged. Yvon Chouinard, who is the founder of Patagonia, was somebody that was inspired by this young activist named Mark Capelli, went to the city council meeting. A bunch of kind of otherwise long-haired hippie surfers got up to speak on behalf of the Ventura River, because surfers understand that like the river health actually affects the surf breaks right out front, right? So that's what transports all the cobbles and all the sand and sediment that makes that surf spot so unique and a great place to surf. And so it was a moment of clarity where we realized like, wow, grassroots activism, one person standing up at a surf film premiere can actually change the course of these important local issues. That proposal was defeated, on in large part because of that single activist, Mark Capelli, and the organization that grew out of him, which was Friends of the Ventura River. We wound up giving Friends of the Ventura their first check, and we also gave them space here within our office to like have an office space and a mailbox and a phone and a desk. So from the very inception of our work in the grassroots space, we realized that yes, a check is meaningful, like giving grants is meaningful, but how else can we show up and be in partnership and solidarity with groups like Friends of the Ventura River? So we started hosting conferences because we realized that, yes, we want to continue giving them the money to do their great work, but additional resources are required to build their capacity and capabilities to be the most effective, strategic, durable organizations possible to affect the type of change that they're focused on.
Yeah, I love that you shared that anecdote because it oftentimes a lot of these grassroots movements, like you said, they start with one person saying, I don't really think that that's right. And then other people are like, oh, yeah, me too. And then what do you do once you have that realization? So I liked this book and the formatting that it had. And it seemed to somewhat mirror an activist's journey from like that initial inception of the thought and then like how you then create those thoughts and turn them into action. So as one of the editors, like why or how did you decide the structure of the book when you were trying to encompass so many different voices?
Mhm. Yeah, well, you spoke to it. I'm really glad that that came through for you. We really wanted anybody to be able to pick up this book and find utility in it. So whether you are an executive director of a small, medium, or large size organization already, or you're somebody that's just curious about the space, and maybe you, like Mark Capelli back in the early 70s, see something in your community that doesn't feel quite right, and you're looking around and you don't see anybody else doing a damn thing about it. Where do you start? Well, we wanted this book to be kind of the entry point for anybody to deepen their practices and make better sense of how do you go from, maybe from scratch into actually an agent of positive change in your community and for the places that you hold dear. And so that's what it does. It really starts. We talk about the activism journey as one that starts with introspection and getting clear about the things that you care most deeply about, that you're actually willing to sacrifice your free time for, or you're willing to sacrifice, you maybe your place in conversation, your place in your community to take a stand for it. And then how do you go from that place, to becoming more involved in local organizations, maybe joining a local organization, volunteering, being on the board, working across organizations and building coalitions. And so that is the journey that many of us are on, because we see things that aren't quite right with the people and places that we love, and we're willing to kind of roll up the sleeves and get dirty with it. And the book hopefully imparts on the reader that there's like time tested best practices for doing this work effectively, and what a great opportunity to learn from others who have done just remarkable work wherever they live.
Yeah, I will say that I think sometimes a lot of different, no matter the movement or the cause, it can feel very overwhelming when you first are starting to learn about it and get invested. But it's nice to hear from so many different seasoned activists and organizers
Mhm.
throughout the book, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel, basically. That's where I'm going with that. So with all of the contributors, I am curious from the editor standpoint, how were you able to actually create a cohesive flow through the book when you're coming from so many different angles?
Yeah, well, with a lot of help from others on my team, honestly. I think what we started with was looking at what worked well in the last book, and then trying to make modifications to bring it up to present day, and hopefully something that would have longevity for the years to come. So it really came through deep consultation with other colleagues, both those within Patagonia and partners outside, and finding the right voices that we hoped would achieve like true diversity in terms of where are they in the world, like globally, regionally, or how are they showing up? What are the issues? What are their life experiences that they're bringing to the table, and the voices that they're contributing to the movement and to the content? And so it was kind of like a bit of a Rubik's cube, trying to figure out what are the right issues, what are the right voices and perspectives. Um, and yeah, we have a Patagonia Books team here that was instrumental in helping to weave all of that into something really coherent, and something that was I feel kind of the book continued to add on top of the chapter before it, so it kind of had this nice flow to it.
Yeah, it did feel like it had that building aspect where, like, once you completed one chapter, you're like going into the next phase,
Yeah.
which I thought was really nice. And because, I mean, the entire theme of the book is kind of like this organization and like getting involved, being a change maker, and it is framed as a guidebook. But are there recurring themes or pieces of advice that you
Mhm.
saw while you were editing that seemed pretty universal?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. There actually were a couple things that popped out, and we remarked upon them as we were pulling the book together. That what's fascinating is that people that again come from like different global regions, or are working on things that are completely distinct, did point to some core lessons. One that was immediately visible to me was to learn from the past, right? Some authors would channel that by saying like learn from your ancestors, particularly people from like native communities would talk about the importance of listening to elders and channeling, giving respect to the fact that we're not doing anything new here, right? Like we have generations and generations of people before us that have been fighting the good fight and standing up for justice and trying to protect places and people. So heard that come through in multiple pieces, and people using different language to describe that. It could also mean just like listen to your parents, or it could mean look around your neighborhood to see what else is already happening. To that to that point, multiple authors cautioned against our instinct to, if you see a problem, create a solution and get people on board with your ideas. Rather, their guidance was like, no, pause, learn from your ancestors, the people before you, previous generations, and also look around. Like there's a high likelihood that somebody's already engaged on this issue. Maybe they've been doing it for years, but they probably have more experience than you do at this juncture. So instead of thinking you have to go create something novel and new, why don't you join an existing effort and bring additional value to something that already has some traction? I think that's really important. We see it in the nonprofit space that, a lot of people are quick to try to create their own organization before actually doing the homework to see who's already in this space and how do I join that versus starting something net new. And another thing that came through is just really the value of relationships and trust, as really a centerpiece for this work. We talk about issues, we talk about projects, we talk about stopping this or starting that, and really at the core of all of these things is that human relationship. Whether that relationship is the people that you work with, or maybe that relationship is with that decision maker that you need to sway and or convince that they need to help support a vision. Maybe that relationship is with your adversary. Whatever it may be, like it is incumbent upon anybody that wants to create change to really invest and show up in relationships, especially if you're trying to drive change that has effect on communities that are not your community. You need to learn how to build relationships in new places and new geographies in a way that brings trust forward and centers others' experiences more than your own.
Adventuring plans on your calendar? Remember to grab your Lava Linens travel towel on your way out the door. Founded by a mother-daughter team, Lava Linens crafts durable, luxurious travel towels as a more sustainable and better performing alternative to microfiber and cotton towels. Powered by flax, hemp, and tencel, they're designed to be by your side for years to come. Use the code Outdoor Minimalist for 15% off your next order. So thinking of the change and then the communities and that general human connection that you noticed throughout the book as a theme, is there one story or like one community effort that has kind of stuck with you?
Mm. Yes, absolutely. There are many, many examples of just inspiration in the book. And, we're not talking about philosophical or fictional accounts. These are examples of people growing up, learning from the past, joining with others, centering relationships, and doing the hard work, to actually drive change. And one that really sticks out to me, and one that I've spoken out before, is a piece written by Amy Bowers Cordalis, who is a Yurok woman up in Northern California, who grew up uh, in the Yurok tribe along the banks of the Klamath River, and for decades was uh, engaged in the work to bring down the Klamath dams. And what I love about this story and why it's so resonant for me is it's timely. This is a recent win. This isn't something that happened, many, many years ago. This is something that we can point to in our kind of immediate timeline. Um, and it is all the more impressive to me because it was led by the local Europe people, right? And through coalitions with other organizations and other stakeholders, they took on, the classic David and Goliath fight to bring down, federal dams on the Klamath River. um, is truly a undertaking of epic proportions. And through their diligence and through that coalition building and really engaging stakeholders, and really paying attention to strategy and opportunities that would present themselves over time, they were able to continue chipping away at this and ultimately successfully complete the largest dam removal project ever, like ever. Um, and it's really touching to see the hard work actually pay off, although the odds were so very long.
It seems like the Yurok tribe has been doing a lot of work lately on a lot of things. I mean, not lately, they always have, but I saw that they had a big win with land back
Mm,
recently as
mm,
well, which is great. If you
yeah.
haven't heard that yet, then you should go check it out, people listening. And I do like that you gave a recent example, not because like the past events are not important. Like you said, we should be looking to the past for inspiration and guidance, but I will say, like, the publishing of this book is arriving at a pretty volatile time frame in the climate and environmental justice realm. So, I'm trying to think of how to best frame this question here. So, with the current administration and all of the changes, everything is kind of being thrust upon different communities and organizations very rapidly. It's like continuously changing. Do you see this guide being able to hopefully support activists and organizers in the current landscape because it is so intense?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I think one thing that this book really aims to impart on the readers is the critical importance of focus and strategy. And, in our current context, it's really hard to focus. I mean, flood the zone is an appropriate way to describe our circumstances. It's hard to keep track of all of the shifting landscapes around us, the daily barrage of updates and threats and opportunities. It's just, yeah, it can be quite overwhelming. In fact, it is quite overwhelming for myself, personally speaking. And so what this book does, I think that it helps to combat that is threefold. Number one, it reminds people to start small, right? So you don't need to be, the silver bullet for climate justice or, insert the thing that you care most about. Rather, you just need the person that commits to showing up and figuring out like a very tangible way that you can contribute some of your capabilities to advance the work. That doesn't mean that you need to tomorrow transform your life from top to bottom and be leading climate marches. Rather, for example, we have Patagonia Action Works is featured in the book, which is the digital platform that we've built that enables anybody to look online, see what are the local organizations, what are their call to actions, like do they have petitions, do they have a rally this weekend, is there an upcoming fundraiser, and it really lowers the bar so that people can get engaged and actually do something that's real and is also hopefully compatible with living your regular life. So number one is like commit to doing something. Number two, getting through that, just being hyper clear about what is the thing that you care most about, right? So in the context of flooding the zone, it's hard to keep track of all the things that we hold dear that are under threat. And I think it's tempting for us to roll up our sleeves and touch all the things that we want to preserve or protect. Rather, this book is reminding us to like pick one thing and pay attention to it, close attention, and try to not be distracted by all of the other noise. So get specific. And thirdly, be strategic, meaning just because you care about something doesn't mean you should go start making noise about it right away. Like actually think through the ways in which your actions and the tactics that you employ will or will not lead to the outcome that you desire. So that's where it really becomes important to link up with organizations that are already in the space, try to understand their strategies and their approach, and lean into those organizations where you actually believe, like, gosh, if we do X, Y, and Z, the outcome will be beneficial for, the future that you want in this world. So lower the bar, get specific about where you want to show up, and be thoughtful and strategic about how your actions will contribute to the world that you want to live in.
Yeah, I love that. I love that there are so many tangible takeaways for people throughout the book, and that it could be fitting for multiple different lifestyles, like you're saying, because everyone can play a role in the climate movement and we all have different strengths and skill sets. We don't need to be doing all of it all at once. And so, are there any? mm, you kind of shared that, but are there any like specific tools or tactics that organizations should particularly be focusing on right now because of the climate crisis?
Yeah, that's a hard one because the answer is yes, right? Like there, the strategy is all the more important. I think one thing that came through this book is just the importance of um, bringing more people into the work. We are at a point in history where it's very easy to know, like, what side of an issue anybody is on, like where it's so polarized and it's really easy to fall into camps and to default into in group or out group or other people if they're not, as progressive as you, or maybe maybe they're not conservative enough. And so we start to find distance between one another that's unnecessary. And so in terms of a strategy or a way for us to show up in this moment is, how do we shrink that distance between one another? How do we find uncommon allies, and build a tent that's big enough and a vision that's inclusive enough that we can actually do something meaningful versus finding our differences and letting that be, the discourse. And it's easy to talk about and it's cliche. However, I happen to think it's very real. And the book gives us tools for, how do we do that? How do we bring people into coalition and into alignment so that, a better future actually is possible and we're not stuck just shouting over one another, um, all the while.
Yeah, I do feel that, especially in the last like 8 or so years, maybe 10 years, that it seems there is a lot of division and there's like both camps are just yelling at each other, like whatever
Yeah.
side you're on. And
Yeah.
there's not a lot of this like cohesive, like, how can we work together, even if we don't necessarily agree on all points?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, like, if you sit down and talk about those things, you have more in common than you don't.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you brought that up. And thinking back to some of the themes that you've already mentioned, do you think that there's any one specific lesson that you learned from all of the activists and people
Mm.
that were a part of the book?
Yes, I learned so much
Mm.
through this project. I feel like I've benefited so much from helping on this project. I could answer this a number of different ways. I think one thing that really stands out to me is, and it goes back to what we were just talking about in terms of bringing people closer together, was a piece written by the Million Person Project, and it's about your personal narrative. And what this unlocked for me was getting clear about my own personal story and the values that drive me and why do I do this work and what was my childhood like really unpacking these intimate details about myself and using that as an entry point for other people to connect with me and to tell the story about the issues and the work that I care most deeply about. I think a lot of us, myself very much included in this, we are so convinced that this is not about us. This is about the issue. This is bigger than us. This is, I want to decenter myself because I want to point to the issues and the data and the science that support how catastrophic all of this is. What the Million Person Project, their piece invites us to do is to rethink that. And in fact, by telling your story and how you relate to, let's say, a given watershed or, an oil refinery that's in your neighborhood or in your aunt's neighborhood, by being hyper personal and vulnerable about your story, that actually invites people into it. What is specific is general, right? So everybody can identify with it and it actually brings people into the work. Whereas if you're just speaking about the mission statement, if you're just talking at a high level, people are apt to tune that out. And so it's an invitation to all of us to really get thoughtful and clear about what drives you and to not shy away from sharing that. In fact, sharing that is the opportunity to build connection and to shrink that distance that we were just talking about. Like, you can talk to somebody that's from a different political party where you might have very different um, belief systems. But by you sharing about your summers of childhood and how that has left an imprint on how you see open space, that person might refer back in their memory about their summers as a kid and the first time they went hunting or fishing with their grandpa. And now you have common ground.
Storytelling is a powerful tool, and people always gravitate towards that. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I think because we've brought up the amount of overwhelm that people are dealing with right now, I think a lot of people before 2025 had a lot of anxiety, eco anxiety, all of that stuff, but it has been somewhat amplified by the news cycle and all of the other things occurring. So, how do you think that this guidebook can help us balance some hope in the movement, but also realism?
Mhm. Yeah, that the overwhelm is real. I'm sure that anybody that's listening to this podcast can identify with that, as can you, and as can I. A couple things that this book helps with regard to that is number one, pointing to actual concrete wins. Like, anybody that's spending time scrolling on their phone or online reading news, like it's sometimes very hard to find the wins and like proof positive that like showing up and giving a shit actually matters. So there is just an underlying reminder that giving up and giving in is simply not an option, right? We have to remain engaged in this. Secondly, as I said earlier, like, set a low bar for yourself. You don't have to be the hero of the story, but you need to be a character, right? So figure out how you contribute and point those contributions where it's most meaningful. So skill-based volunteering is a great remedy for somebody that feels overwhelmed and they don't feel like they can take the time to go to the march this weekend, or they don't have time to go do the field day or whatever it may be. From the comfort of your own kitchen table, you can be a skill-based volunteer and help an organization with copywriting or website design or, strategic planning, or things that are like based on your existing skill set that these organizations like critically need. So there's a way to show up where it again, it doesn't require you to overhaul your life or to like forego a weekend of rest. It just means you have to be thoughtful about how you show up and where to do it. um, and thirdly, I think rest and really allowing yourself to renew is also very important. We have um, a piece in here just about how important it is to practice self-care. It's this thing that everybody talks about, and yet it's woefully missing everywhere you look. And so how do you lead with that and ensure that you're in this for the long haul? I tell you what, it's not by burning the candle at both ends forever and ever, right? Like, and the beginning chapter actually speaks to this as well, which I found really important, which is, those of us that are seeing things broken in our world are urgently stepping up to fix and to help correct and to find solutions, right? So there's a lot of like, I got this. This is a sprint. I'm just going to put my head down and help to, change the things in the world that need attention. Well, you do that for a couple of years and you realize like, oh my gosh, this is not a sprint. It's a marathon. I need to pace myself, and if I'm going to do this for the long haul, I really have to be mindful about the energy output and how I recover. And as you've been in the work longer, yet you realize it's not a sprint or a marathon, but it really is like a relay race. And so, how are you taking the baton, being mindful of your needs and finding some level of balance in your life, and passing the baton to others and bringing people, as we talked about earlier, into the work, like expanding that tent. So, that self care piece. It means that, like, yes, you have to care for yourself and bring more people into the work. Remember that this is a relay race. you're not going to win the race ever. Like you can sprint until your last days here. That's not what's going to carry the day.
Yeah, that's a really good example and kind of like approach, because I often do hear people say that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. But I was like, I don't know, marathons like kind of end, but the relay race helps me envision it a little bit better.
And marathons are gnarly. Like we don't all
They
sign up for
are.
marathons all the time.
No, it's easier when you have a team, okay? Um, Awesome. Well, I think that this was great. I'm really happy that you had time to chat. And of course, I hope that people will check out the book, whether you're a brand, an organization, or an individual, because I think you can really get something from it no matter where you're positioned in the movement. But before we share resources of where to find the book, if someone wants to get involved in any form of grassroots organizing, where would you say is the first place that they should start?
Mm. Uh, Gosh, this is going to sound so self-referential here, but we have built this Patagonia Action Works, which is a reflection of all of the organizations that we fund in North America, and so it gives you the opportunity to get a sense of like who's doing great work in terms of biodiversity or climate or thriving communities or healthy land and water work. Like you can sort and find and filter organizations that are in your proximity that are doing work within those issue areas. And it helps to tee up very low hanging fruit opportunities to take that first step. Maybe it's just to join them for a movie night, or maybe it's something that's more intensive than that. Maybe it's actually showing up to a city council meeting to speak on behalf of an issue or to make your voice heard. Um, it really is a great entry point for folks that know that they want to take that first step but are not quite sure where or how to do that. Again, it's Patagonia Action Works, and these are organizations that we've been funding. We know that they're doing great work, and we hope that people take that first step to show up and support those organizations, and thereby also grow into their grow into themselves as activists and grow into themselves as somebody who's not afraid to take that first step. And once you take that first step, it will beget further steps forward as well.
Yes, it does become easier as you get more involved. But if people do decide that they want to at least check out the book, what's the best place to do that?
Yeah, you could find it on our website, so patagonia.com. Also, any book retailer that you prefer, local bookshops are awesome. And especially in these days, local economies are all the more important. So go check it out there. Hopefully they have it on the rack for you. And, it's a beautiful book. There's a lot of really inspiring words, but the photos are gorgeous. And yeah, I hope your listeners enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. Is there anything else that you want to add?
The only thing that I'd add is like all of the examples in the book about collaboration and working with others and bringing voices together and perspectives into harmony. Like this project was such an example of that. Like, yes, I have the benefit of having my name on the cover, but really I worked with so many people to source the right voices and the right perspectives and examples that should be showcased in this book. And so just, yeah, a real life example of like working together is generally the best way forward. And that was certainly the case with this book.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book, on YouTube, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.